Hello and welcome to the Startups of London podcast. I'm your host Ozan and the founder of Startups of London. Today, I'm joined by Daniel Svonava. Daniel built user models that power YouTube ads, published original research and holds patents in ML. Today, he serves on a board of NFT game studio, which I think is very fascinating, and a creator economy startup. But most importantly, especially for today, he is here as the CEO of Superlinked. So Superlinked is, in their definition, a social infrastructure startup that helps platforms and communities create meaningful engagement for their users. So, Daniel, welcome to the chat, first of all.
Hey, Ozan. Glad to be here.
So can you expand on what you mean by a social infrastructure startup?
Absolutely. So as a founder of a consumer product nowadays, let's say, one of your tasks or problems is to create an experience within your product that brings people together in addition to helping them achieve their goal that you set out to achieve with the product you are building, right? It's kind of becoming a necessity to offer a social experience within the product, and this is what we help startups to do.
It's interesting. The interaction between the human biology. I don't know if you're into neuroscience and the neurochemistry aspect of us as human beings. Like, I think we are fascinating machines. So there's an interaction between our biology at the neurochemical level and the apps that we use, the digital tools that we use. I always think in terms of, like, my background is in sociology and psychology. Perhaps I'm a bit biased here, but I always imagine when I'm stuck with what a person would do, I always imagine a tribe of us, like 20, 30, 40 people sitting around the campfire. And so our benchmark for almost everything, and even for the things that we don't realize, our benchmark is social. We need the interaction of others. We seek others. We live for others to a certain extent.
That's right.
Like how does, my question I guess here is, so how does the evolution of these digital tools, applications, social media platforms play into these vulnerabilities, these needs? Do they exploit them? Do they provide the service? And how are we going to find the balance here?
Mm-hmm. So you are kind of absolutely right that it seems there is no longer enough to just kind of offer a basic service, and we look for that social aspect everywhere we go, and it can be used in kind of the exploitative ways, but also in positive ways. So if you look at any vertical of products, let's say design tools, it used to be the case that a designer just needed an accurate visual tool to make their designs. But now we have Figma, let's say, where designers can collaborate in producing the result. And it seems to be actually helpful, right? So in perhaps the previous generation of products, everybody was thinking, how to make those products more engaging with notifications, tapping into those basal needs we have. But I think the space has matured enough to recognize that we can actually create positive value through social interaction. And I think we are really starting to see that now across the board, from fintech to creative tools to even marketplaces. So marketplaces now are becoming more and more social, people purchasing stuff together, identifying new trends, and so on.
I have an example for what you just described, and I think it's kind of extreme, but I think it works. So I'm following the launch of this new MMORPG called Ashes of Creation. I'm not sure it's going to be a good one or a bad one, but I've read very interesting things about it. That's very unique in a lot of sense. And they're using Unreal Engine 5, which is the graphics engine that is being used with a lot of games. So what we see in many games is the Unreal Engine 4. But the difference between 5 and 4 is in 5 you can work you can edit the map and the world with multi-users collaboratively at the same time.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the biggest, not in terms of the technical looks of the engine, but in terms of the collaboration. This is promoted as a very big step, and I've seen some companies taking the plunge and moving just because of that reason. So
Yeah.
it's in places you wouldn't expect, I guess.
And gaming is a great example of something that works better the more people kind of join the experience. And for example, with Roblox, we see that users also want to create within the game and not just passively consume it. So I think this will only expand, and we see whole economies developing within games nowadays. And I think that trend is basically culminating with the NFT gaming.
It is indeed. So how does Superlinked work behind the scenes? If you can take us into a reasonable dive into the engineering and the design and the back-end infrastructure of the business. I try to keep it simple so we stick with you and keep understanding it. But I am
Absolutely.
curious, and I think people are curious. So how does it actually work?
So if you think about what makes a good social experience, at the heart of it, let's take Twitter for just to have a well-known example. I'm not saying that Twitter works particularly well, but that it is. What makes for a social experience is at the heart of it is a recommender engine that helps you discover people, content, and other parts of the experience on the platform when you join. Without this kind of matchmaking engine in the middle, there is effectively no social experience because you didn't discover the people and the pieces you want to interact with in the first place. So something like RSS feeds and email are not really social in that sense because you have to somehow find first the people and the content you want to interact with, and then only you have kind of a communication channel. But if you want the social experience, you need that kind of social brain in the middle, putting the pieces together, basically. And so Superlinked is that we are basically calling it social AI. So it's that brain at the center of the experience that helps the platform, which is our client, to put the right people together, the right people and the right content and, events and items to purchase and so on.
We've mentioned that you hold some patents in machine learning and published some original research. I'm just curious, what was it, and does it in any way relate to perhaps at a direct level, but perhaps at an inspirational exploration-based level for you or interest-based level for you? Are there any similarities between Superlinked and that?
Absolutely. So I have spent 7 years at YouTube as a tech lead, building user models and feeding insights from those models into the ads ecosystem within YouTube. And this basically, Superlinked is me doing that for kind of the long tail of social for those other platforms that are perhaps not quite there with their technical capabilities. Superlinked is a way for them to up-level the experience to kind of match the old big platforms that are still out there. Because as a founder, if you want a social aspect to your app, to your platform, to your product, it's difficult to build all of that. Plus, also do the fintech or the marketplace that you set out to build. And so my work at YouTube sort of directly led to me realizing that it shouldn't be just those big companies that should have this capability, but we need to bring it to hands of more founders and more technologists, basically. And I can kind of tell you a little bit about the patent.
Yeah, please.
It was actually I actually got it already during my internship at Google, and
Yeah. Good start. Good start.
Which usually doesn't happen that way. But I was lucky, that I had a really strong team around me. And what we did was data mining from unstructured data. So we were building models for kind of local real-world businesses, actually. So basically inferring things about the local business based on the data that the business posted on their website and that might be around the internet, and figuring out, okay, is this a restaurant? When people engage with it, how should that engagement be, and so on. So kind of making sense out of chaos, which is perhaps an inspiration for doing that for the users later on during my career.
That's a really interesting story. There's a bit of luck, and I think it's wise of you to appreciate the role of luck because sometimes people don't, and I think luck does play an important part in our lives.
Yep.
So I
And,
think it's good to recognize it sometimes.
absolutely. And I think people can, increase their surface to be lucky by engaging with,
Yeah,
with promising kind of opportunities and perhaps saying yes slightly too many times. That's also kind of dangerous, but that's the way you put yourself in those places where luck can strike, basically. And
indeed. I love that philosophy. It's one I share and try to apply myself as well. But another question, and I had this question for 5 years, but I think this was the right time to ask it. So, are you ready for it?
bring it.
What is wrong with LinkedIn?
So I think to sort of start to unpack such a question, one should look at incentives, right? What are the different players within the system and what are their goals and motivations? And with LinkedIn, we can basically see that, first of all, they are posting their revenue and where it is coming from. So I recommend you have a look at that. And when you do, you find out that the user subscriptions are the main driver of their revenue, right? Yeah. So the recruiters and sales folks out there pay premium to be able to discover their prospects better and approach them and get value out of the platform. Mm-hmm. And this is what the platform is then optimized to do, because that's how it makes money, right? And so if you want an experience where you are kind of in the driver's seat and you are figuring out who you want to talk to instead of folks coming to you, then you need to engineer a different experience. But there is a place for LinkedIn as well, and this is what I think people maybe don't realize necessarily, is that in the previous cycle, social used to mean basically Facebook and LinkedIn, and that's it. And in the current one, there are many more different experiences out there, right? There is this explosion of communities, virtual events, social products. And I think people can find, what suits them the best and join those spaces. And this is actually the kind of this social explosion is what we aim to support. Because if you have so many different experiences out there, they can't all build this infrastructure, this social AI. And this is why it makes sense to, have Superlinked, because it can then support all of those different experiences, some of which, you'll find more pleasing than others, I'm sure.
Indeed, that's true. By the way, I was looking at LinkedIn's number, and they had a valuation of 30 billion in 2015, which dropped by 10% to 27 in 2020, and then another 16% just in the last year. So it's down to 22 billion, and they had a loss of around 150 million. Like, this is what Microsoft does with some products. They both Activision, so people are worried a bit because of that. It's quite recent news, but
it's also kind of surprising because if you look at their revenue, that's growing. I think that it was
that's possible. The annual revenue for 2020 was 8 billion, and it might have grown even further.
Yeah.
No, in 2019 it's 6.7 billion, and 20% year-on-year increase in 2021.
Yeah.
I've worked as a recruiter, so I've not only purchased but used the LinkedIn Recruiter Suite. I have also used a LinkedIn Sales Navigator. But they had the advantage of bringing everyone together. So did Facebook. And like, my question, I guess, here is like there's an interesting, perhaps, I don't know how to put this. But if simply some of these platforms listen to their users more and build stuff in a way that people, not just in the short term, but in the long term, would find fruitful, enhancing, value adding to their life, I think they could have been at a better spot. But like, what do I know? Just take it, for example, the simple lack of the chronological viewing option for what happened in your social circle and so on. So, like, what's your personal take on this?
Okay, on one hand, we are talking about the consumer software, right? And it's very hard to predict what people will engage with. They might have everybody says, okay, listen to your users and really use that to drive the roadmap of your product. I think it's really hard to have people design the product, to have users design, to give you feature ideas. This is
the cacophony, right? Everybody says something,
yes,
everybody
it's
wants
tricky.
something else.
And so what I think is important is to listen, is listening to users' problems, right? Not perhaps their ideas about solutions, but the problems. They're kind of experts on their own problems. So this is
That's
helpful to
don't ask
listen.
for solutions, ask for problems, and find the solution with experts who can solve the problems.
Yes, and then also instead of listening to their feedback, it's better to simply observe how they behave within your product, because this is kind of the revealed preference versus declared, right? The revealed preference is the truth in a way. So I think it's better to do that and to have some insight into their behavior, and then use that to shape the product, quickly iterate, and go that way. And then some of these decisions that could seem nonsensical at first. So, for example, the algorithmic feed that you mentioned, right? Instead of chronological, it's somehow filtered. This is a consequence of the average number of people that you are connected with or that you follow on that given network increases over time for users that have been around for a while. And at a certain point, that feed just goes too fast for it to be a good experience. And then the platform has to, and if you join the Discord server, you know what I'm talking about, because there are Discord servers now that have tens of thousands of users in them, and it's just noise, right? And so platforms have to figure out, okay, we are going to somehow try and curate the experience for the user. Otherwise, it's just overwhelming. And here we come back to that, social AI at the heart of it, because that's the piece that does the curation and attempts to figure out what is it that you want to see. And this is difficult.
It's an interesting perspective, definitely. So can you tell me about, I want to jump back to Superlinked just for a second here so I get a full picture of it. For a lot of founders building business, especially platform businesses, the biggest challenge is a kind of a chicken and egg problem. You need to attract users so the platform is meaningful. We had a similar guest last week. We talked about a similar topic as well. But once you try to inflate the numbers, like if you try to inflate the numbers with just the quantity of users, then the quality depreciates, which creates another problem. So you have to find a balance between, we had this chat with Brian from Opportunity Network. So you have to have high quality people within the network and at a quantity. So how do you manage that? How do you first overcome that chicken and egg problem and start really kicking the engine and making sure it's humming at the right frequency?
So I think what's important here is focus. And, if you identify the right user group to begin with, and you have a good idea for who those people are and where they go and what is it that they want or miss, then you can approach that group and kind of recruit users from within a relatively small group, right? And what this does is it basically, you don't have to recruit as many of them as if you had a general target, because they'll be kind of homogeneous enough to interact, to let's sell and buy from each other, because you kind of curate that set, right? So this, I think it's very important. And then when these early users come to your platform, you better give them an experience that is enticing already, right? So you don't only rely on the platform working when it's at scale. You figure out how to offer a good experience for those early users as well. And this is where, when we are building a recommender engine, we think about this a lot, because normally when you have these type of solutions, they need a while to actually start working. They need to observe the users for a while to build an understanding of what the users want. And so this is why we are building Superlinked in a way that doesn't have this cold start problem, because we use third-party data that the user kind of declares to us. Let's say when a user is signing up for a professional social experience, they can provide their LinkedIn profile, and from this profile, we can build the initial understanding of the user to give them the right experience right away, instead of, needing them to come back several times, which they won't. If the experience isn't good from the beginning,
Yeah.
they won't come back. They won't teach the model what they want, and it doesn't work. And so I think it's important to really think about that first experience, and this is what we also focus on and help our clients do well.
You ask just a few basic questions. I'm looking at the sign-up form, just the basic information, and then who the person is. I'm a creator. I run a professional community. I'm an active member, connecting people. I have a connector business. So quite simple. And then you also ask a link for the project and goals for the project. So these are the key identifiers that you start with to match people. Is that the case, or is that inaccurate?
So what you are describing is the sign-up process on our current website, and this is for the platform owners or the community managers that want, to use Superlinked to improve their community, their engagement. So we only take those few basic data points, and then the process of us, going on a call with them, figuring out, okay, what sort of social experience you want to inject within your product, or how, you want help with your community. And then we build a separate experience for the actual end user, the community member. The onboarding there looks different, and it's customized for each community or each product. And it aims to extract those basic data points that I mentioned, like LinkedIn profile, in order for us then to be able to match the right people.
A lot of the growth comes to finding the product market fit, and then that acceleration usually for some businesses is more reliant on finding a financial resource, and for some businesses it's more than the others. So where do you sit in that? And with that, perhaps I would love to hear about your team, your growth journey, and finally, what's the story with the fundraising? I would love to hear about that a bit.
Absolutely. So for the types of businesses where you need to capture a lot of the market quickly in order to provide a better experience, if you have some sort of economies of scale or network effects within your product, it helps to, grab a lot of the market quickly and then get those benefits. I think for those types of businesses, it's worth to consider, external financing that just helps you get there faster, because the overall pie is very big. And, yes, you are selling a part of your company, but the whole company becomes much more valuable if you are able to get to market faster, right? And so for us, that's definitely the case. And that's why we are pursuing. I'm just about to wrap up our seed round, actually. Well, the label is an interesting point there. Is it the seed? Is it the pre-seed these days?
It's all mixed
it's just crazy.
Paul Graham had a tweet about it, 1.1 million pre-seed round, and he said, does this sound right to you? And I don't think it sounds right.
Yeah, I mean, throughout the scale, I think also the late stage financing is absolutely crazy these days. But regardless, it's up to the founder to manage this well, to perhaps not rise at the biggest possible valuation, have trouble chasing that for the next round, because you need, the valuation should only increase, and if you start very high, it's very hard to do that. And so one has to be smart about it. But at the same time, if you get investors that understand your space, it can be super helpful beyond the money. So we are working on our round, and we are about to put everything together. So I'm hopeful on that front. In terms of the team, I have my co-founder, Ben. He's originally also technical software engineering background, but he went more towards the business. And he spent time at McKinsey and PwC and the classic kind of business deep dive for a technical person. Yeah. And so we started working on this about slightly more than a year ago, and has been great so far. We were actually introduced by a common acquaintance, the Superlinked UX advisor. So, just tells you about the power of relationships. And then we have a small team, 7 folks, a couple engineers, Victoria, you met for business development. And Yeah.
So, what was the company? Where was the company based? The one you got or you are finalizing the round with? Is it based in the U.S., EU, UK?
So it's based in the UK. I personally spent most of my time in Switzerland because I was out here for my work with YouTube, and I really like the countryside here. The mountains.
Mm.
So I'm based out of here, and nowadays it used to be the case that if you had kind of fully remote team, fundraising was more difficult. You were not taken as seriously.
Yeah.
But in the last couple of years, this problem went away completely. So I think it's basically possible to raise money out of Europe, even with US funds, and they don't even make you relocate the entity necessarily to the US. We might do it if a US fund ends up leading the round, but it's kind of entirely our choice basically at this point. So I recommend really kind of shopping around and looking for funds that fit well as opposed to being restricted to the geography.
That's really interesting. It's an unthought of side effect of this whole situation of the pandemic and so on. It's not just we work remotely from home. We always think about the employee perspective. We talk about the employer perspective, or we read about it and listen about it. But what you just said, I think, sounds unique, and I think it's an insight. Now, it's a bigger, more international pool of investors to choose from, and for investors, it's a bigger, more international pool of companies to potentially invest, if I'm getting that right. And with that,
Yes.
My final question to you as we run out of time, what is the major difference that you've observed having these conversations between investors based in the US, in the UK, for example?
Mm-hmm. I think the way to summarize that is that it feels like the US investors invest in startups and the European ones invest in businesses.
That's good. I love it. It's quite easy to remember, but it makes sense. Great.
Yeah. And, I can kind of unpack that a little bit. So, in my conversations with the US investors, oftentimes we spend the whole call on how we understand where the whole space is going, what's the vision, what are the different stakeholders, kind of the big picture description of the opportunity. Whereas with European investors, we spend a lot more time on the tactical level, so what are we doing over the next year? What is very specifically the problem we solve on that time scale? So it gets much more into details. And if you are an early stage founder, you better have both of those pieces, right? You better know exactly what you are solving for exactly whom in that time scale of a year. And it's ideally you have started doing that already. And also, how can this be a venture scale outcome? Because if there isn't a plausible path towards multi-billion-dollar company, then it doesn't make sense for early stage VCs to invest, right? And so you have to have both of those pieces. But in Europe, you probably emphasize the shorter term, and in the US, the big vision and the longer term.
That's actually incredibly valuable insight, and thank you for sharing it with us. It was a pleasure having you on. Great chat. I'm so happy we learned about Superlinked, and so for the people listening to the chat, take a look at it, superlinked.com, and might be something you might enjoy and benefit from as well. And I wish you the best with the business, Daniel. I love this because you have the background, and I think the world needs better platforms. So kudos to you and good luck in the journey.
Thank you. And for people listening, you can also give us a follow on @Superlinked on Twitter. Thanks a lot, Ozan, for having me.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Take care.